That's what happened. Okay. So I think, all right. I think it says I'm live now. Oh my gosh. We may have to go have this whole conversation again there, Bill. I'm so sorry. Oh, okay. Is it working? Is it working, everyone? Is it working? Is that live? Is that doing its thing? I hope so. Okay, don't stop. We can all enjoy it. Okay. All right. We're finally working. It's happening. That was
okay.
A nightmare. So we have Bill and I did a dress rehearsal for the last 20 minutes or so.
Oh, great.
We'll go through this all over again. Welcome everybody to Houston Wade's Raging Election, where apparently when he uses a whole new streaming software, it doesn't automatically start streaming when he hits start streaming, which is a real bummer. But on the show today, I've got Bill Marler, who is the top attorney on food safety in America, and we're going to talk about the politics behind food safety, the history of it, how he got his start, and hopefully we can recap all the wonderful conversation I had with him for the last 20 minutes that no one saw, because you know, I'm a technological wizard. It wouldn't be a Houston Wade channel without having something go absolutely horribly wrong. So welcome everyone. I'm going to play our intro, and we'll rock and roll here in a sec. All right, I'm on mute there. Oh my gosh, how embarrassing.
That happens. Tech is tech.
Oh, I know. Okay, so hope you're ready to just talk about it all over again. But we have a larger audience popping in now that we're actually going live. So that's, I was looking at that before and I was like, man, there's only 10 people in there. What's going on? Because they weren't seeing anything. Okay. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Well, all right. So, Bill, welcome. Bill's a neighbor of mine here on Bainbridge, and sort of, you know, tripped and fell into becoming the food safety guy back in the 1990s when Jack in the Box was undercooking beef and poisoned thousands of people across the western United States. And ended up winning big settlements against the company when they sued over the cooking practices that Jack in the Box had, and that sort of got his start into this field of law. So you had a client who recommended you to a family who was affected by this, right? And that's sort of how you just happened upon this career.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I certainly remember, you know, the early days of, you know, the news starting to report on something going on and nobody quite knew what it was. And it was maybe the day that they announced that it was linked to Jack in the Box. I'd gotten a call from a former client who had a friend whose kid was hospitalized, and I wound up representing that kid, filing, you know, one of the first lawsuits. I think it was the first lawsuit. Yeah. And then, you know, went from having one client to 100 clients to more, and, you know, wound up ultimately being the, you know, the lead lawyer in the litigation, along with a lot of other really good lawyers in the state of Washington. But you know, I offered to do most of the work, and most people just said, "That's a great idea. You go do that." So
across the country, the standard for cooking beef was to 140 degrees, and in Washington, they had made it 155 degrees because they saw the danger in how we were cooking our beef, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and but Jack in the Box, they knew better, but they ignored it, right?
Yeah, they absolutely when the state of Washington made that change, and the U.S. Food Code is put out by the FDA fairly frequently, and the states can adopt the minimum standards, but they can raise those standards if they choose. Washington chose to raise that standard because over the course of the late 80s, it was becoming apparent that E. coli 0157, the Shiga toxin producing E. coli, was being linked to consumption of undercooked hamburger. So they wanted to increase that cook temperature so people wouldn't get sick.
Yeah.
And they disseminated that information out to all the restaurants in the state of Washington and sent it to corporate headquarters of restaurants that had franchises in the state of Washington. So Jack in the Box, ultimately in the documents that we got in the litigation, we were able to show that Jack in the Box actually got those documents.
Yeah. So for the folks that aren't really familiar with E. coli, it's everywhere.
Yep.
And with cattle in particular, with ungulates and things that eat grass, it resides in their guts. And so
Right.
at big packing plants, big meat slaughterhouses, if there's a mishap and they nick the gut, it can spread onto that cow, onto the surface of the meat. And then if you're grinding the beef, you're grinding up thousands of cows all at once into one process. So that bacteria can then spread across thousands of orders of this beef, and you really can't pinpoint or highlight where it's coming from specifically, just to know that this one company perhaps it's responsible. Yeah, go into the detail of the Shiga toxin, because it's
so as you point out, Houston, it's E. coli is the most populous bug on the planet.
Yeah.
But most of them cause no human harm, but there's a handful of them that cause Shiga toxin producing E. coli can cause human illness and sometimes severe.
Yeah.
There's really only a handful of those. E. coli 0157 is sort of the predominant strain. And it's been around for a while, but has really kind of grown up and evolved in cattle feedlots. And so that's really where, this bug has come. And so it was getting in the meat supply, specifically getting into hamburgers. If it's on the surface of a steak, you can grill the surface of the steak and you kill the bacteria.
Yeah.
And so unless that meat is needle tenderized, you're pretty safe even eating a rare steak.
Yeah.
May not be something that a Bill Marler might choose, but nonetheless, so it's that grinding of that hamburger that was risky.
Yeah.
But in the 80s and 90s, the government, did not deem E. coli an adulterant in hamburger or in any meat.
Yeah.
And so companies could knowingly sell E. coli contaminated meat to the marketplace, and with the sense that, hey, somebody's going to cook it, and it's their problem.
Yeah.
The problem is people weren't cooking it properly, and that's why we had outbreaks after outbreaks after outbreaks.
Yeah. So with Jack in the Box, it came down to they dumped 1 million documents on you, and I forgot to plug his movie. His documentary Poisoned is on Netflix. Came out last October. It's really good. It does a great kind of like brief history of the last 30 years of food safety and what's happening governmentally and the private interests involved and everything. When we'll talk more about that. But so they dumped 1 million documents on you, and this is what they do in court cases. They love to just like your discovery.
It's really it's pretty common. Maybe not that many documents, but it's pretty common. Even cases today where we have more technology to deal with it, which makes my life easier. But back in the day, we didn't have OCR scanners and AI. And so you actually really had to look at the documents. And I started uncovering documents that really showed that Jack in the Box knew about the problems and just frankly didn't want to deal with it because they wanted to keep their food fast food. And so they had a 2-minute cook time that was sacrosanct. It was, their main rule, as opposed to cooking hamburgers so it'd be safe. It was cooking hamburgers to 2 minutes.
Yeah. And how long do they have to cook the hamburgers to make it safe?
Yeah, 2 minutes and 15 seconds, even on the temperatures that were, when one of the other things too is that the grill temperatures were variable. The newer grills tended to cook hotter. So 2 minutes would actually cook a hamburger thoroughly,
Yeah.
but some older grills were cooked cooler and would not get the hamburgers completely done. And it also happened that there were a lot of old grills in the state of Washington. So
Yeah.
there was a sort of a number of things that, kind of came together at the same time that wound up sickening several hundred people, putting, 75 children with acute kidney failure and
Oh,
four
yeah.
deaths. It
Yeah.
was a big deal.
I mean, thousands of people were sickened by it,
Yeah.
and it was a national news event. It was huge here in the Northwest. During the previous 20 minutes when I wasn't straight live streaming, I was explaining that a kid that was at my church, he had to get new kidneys. He was like 9 or 10 years old. He was just a little dude,
Yeah.
and it happened to people all over the place. And this really, I mean, it put food safety on the map in a way that probably had been since Typhoid Mary. Really, like,
No, absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
no. I mean, and probably since, pasteurization of milk
yeah,
and brucellosis and the type things that were killing kids in the 20s.
yeah.
So yeah.
So you reach settlement in these hundreds of clients for just what at the 1990s was a just obscene amount of money, I think, for settlements of this kind.
Yeah.
And but because of the news it made and the families, they really like started lobbying the government, basically, right?
Hmm.
And we got changes from the federal
Yeah.
government towards
Yeah.
beef.
Yeah. And it, I admire so many of my clients and so many of the other families who spent time going to DC and talking about their child who had died and
Yeah.
child who was severely injured. But it put a human face, and both for the government, lobbyists, Congress members, senators, and the pressure was on USDA. And so, in late 1994, they deemed E. coli 0157 in hamburger to be an adulterant, which meant that instead of knowingly selling it with it in there,
Yeah.
if they knew that it was in there, they couldn't send it into the marketplace. And so it also prompted industry to start testing, government to start testing.
Yeah.
If, I remember, I wouldn't expect others to remember, but during the 90s, early 2000s, there was a recall of hamburger all the time.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was a million pounds here, a million pounds here, 10
Yeah.
million pounds there. That's really expensive. Recalls are very expensive. And then on top of that, there was the lawsuits that
Yep.
we continued to bring until the industry and government cleaned up their act. And so, and I tell this to people all the time, 99% of my law firm revenue in the late, from mid 90s to early part of 2000s was E. coli cases linked to hamburger. And because of what industry did and because of what government did
Yeah.
and because of what consumers did, that disappeared. And, and that's a good thing. And I
What
think we can learn from that. I
what
think we can learn that government and industry, consumers working together can solve problems.
So what changes specifically got into the slaughterhouses and packing plants to reduce E. coli and the
Yeah.
supply?
Yeah, so there was a lot of interventions from washing cattle when they came in,
Yeah.
to different kinds of slaughtering techniques that made it less likely to nick a gut or
Yeah.
to get E. coli on the hide and E. coli onto the meat. There were different kinds of acidic washes that were fine for human consumption that were put on the exterior of the cow.
Yeah.
There was an invention of an interesting invention by someone here in the Pacific Northwest, that it was a big giant room that cattle carcasses went into, and it was steamed. So the E. coli on the exterior was
Yeah.
likely to be killed. Then, because what hamburger is made of is what's called trim.
Yeah.
As you go through the slaughtering process and cutting up the meat, there's meat leftovers and, fat and meat. That's what becomes different kinds of hamburger. And they started testing the trim
Yeah.
and not using it if it tested positive for E. coli.
Okay.
Surprise, surprise.
How
And so
do you know how fast that test is? Going to do it pretty quickly, or is it?
it was slow at beginning,
Yeah.
but now it's very rapid.
Okay.
And so a lot of times, even during the mid 90s, late 90s, they were still testing and then shipping it, hoping it was negative, and
Yeah.
then they'd have to pull it back off the market. Then the tests got better,
Yeah.
and so they could test it, hold it, wait for the test result to come back. If it was negative, they'd grind it and they'd ship it.
Yeah.
And so that's what, it used to be hemolytic uremic syndrome, which is a bad outcome of E. coli 0157, used to be called the hamburger disease.
Mm.
And that's not the way it is anymore.
Yeah.
And really, in the 90s, that's all I did was E. coli cases linked to hamburger for the most part. And today, it's very unusual to have an E. coli case linked to hamburger.
So basically, what we've demonstrated is that these regulations can be incredibly effective. like we can do it. We have it within our technology to do it.
And the meat industry is better for it.
Yeah.
I mean, at the very beginning, they were like, "Oh no, we can't do it. Hamburgers will cost £1 billion. It'll be terrible." And it worked out. And little kids aren't dying from eating a hamburger.
Yeah.
Or if it's very rare. I mean, I haven't. I really have not had a hamburger related case really until recently. And there's been a small outbreak up in Montana, all linked to one purveyor of beef sold at restaurants in Kalispell.
Yeah.
And about 20 people got sick and 2 unfortunately died.
Oh.
But that is a rarity in my business, which is, I think it's one of those kind of things. I actually, Houston, this might sound kind of weird, but I was actually the keynote speaker on the 20th anniversary of the Jack in the Box outbreak at the American Meat Institute annual convention. And my speech was, it took 4 dead kids and hundreds of people getting sick severely, but the industry and government working together solved a problem that actually put me out of business. Put me out of the meat business anyway. And it's to me, of all the things that I've seen happen in food safety, it's the one thing I talk about a lot when I talk to industry and I talk to government. I did a speech today via Zoom with about 500 regulators in California. I just, we can solve these problems. It just requires, focused action and, and working across, sometimes difficult lines of communication.
Yeah. So, progressing from the E. coli outbreaks, burgers, kind of fixing the system in a large part for that. The next test came along, which was greens, right? Yeah. Leafy greens.
And they're tied, and they're interestingly tied to the same problem, only different. So E. coli 0157, and there's a couple of other Shiga toxin producing E. colis that cause human illness, are in the guts of cows. Mm-hmm. And they've also gotten into the guts of pigs, wild pigs. They've gotten into deer and other animals. And so, it is becoming an environmental pathogen. And if you think about it, you grow lettuce outside, you use irrigation water that may at some point upstream gone past a cattle feedlot. And, E. coli 0157, makes it onto these plants in one form or another, either windblown from a cattle feedlot or waterborne from, water that's not properly treated. And leafy greens are a ready-to-eat product. You can wash them, but that's not necessarily going to get all of the bacteria off, because one of the things that's really important to understand is, E. coli 0157 can kill you with 50 bacterium,
Yeah.
and 100,000 of them would fit on the head of a pin.
Mm.
So, you're not talking about visible
Yeah.
fecal contamination. And so, um, you know, cattle feedlots are now, you know, cattle feedlots, cattle being upstream from growing areas is, the reason why these leafy green outbreaks continue to happen.
Yeah. So one of my degrees in geography, and I remember taking my agricultural geography class, and we were talking. This is 20 years ago now, but I remember a large part of the conversation was uh, our food growers are getting more and more concentrated into fewer and fewer producers. And when you
Yep.
get things like leafy greens, you might have stuff growing all over the country, but it's going to the same packing plant. So that when you do have
Right.
an outbreak, it's almost impossible to trace back to where it came from.
Yes, yes and no,
Okay.
Houston. I mean, there new FDA rules have come into being in the
Okay.
last decade.
Oh, that's
Um,
past my time.
the food,
Yeah.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
no, in the
Yeah.
food, it's called the Food Safety Modernization Act, or called FSMA. It's a bill that I worked on for, almost a decade,
Okay.
and I've got funny stories about it passing, and signed by President Obama. And actually, if you come down to the clubhouse, you can see the bill that was signed by Obama and
Cool.
given to me, which is
Yeah.
kind of cool. And um, uh, so the traceability is actually better.
Okay.
But the problem with mass produced food, and it's not like I'm a big organic-y guy or
Yeah.
something. Yeah, I get that, there's a lot of places in the world that you can't go to your CSA on Bainbridge Island, and you can't do that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
or everywhere.
Yeah.
But, I'll give you an example of an outbreak. It was a terrible, terrible E. coli outbreak in 2006 linked to baby spinach, Dole baby spinach. And we were able to link it to one 25-acre organic spinach farm outside of Salinas, California. And, they harvested that whole field in one day,
Yeah.
and they took it to a plant. They triple washed it, put it in bags, and shipped it around the country. 205 people were sick and 5 people died.
Oh.
Had that spinach field been been harvested in bunches,
Yeah.
like you can buy sometimes spinach,
Yeah.
would some of the lettuce or some of the spinach be contaminated? Yeah, but not all of the spinach
Yeah.
would have been contaminated. They had some wild pig intrusion in
Mm.
the fields, and maybe some pigs did their business, on some leaves, but certainly not all of them.
Yeah.
But when you cut it all at once and you put it into a blue to clean,
Yeah. And then it
it
gets.
spread
Yep.
everything around. And it was like a E. coli soup. And so, that's one of the things about, mass production is
Yeah.
that in some respects it can be really good to keep control of things, but if something goes sideways, it just blows up in your face.
Yeah. So, I mean, in the movie detail, you've got, uh, uh, like a Chipotle, had problems with, was it romaine greens that were in, burritos and things. And the leafy greens really seem to be in the movie talk about Salinas and was it, Yuma?
Yeah. So there's 2 places in the US that grow most of the lettuce for North America,
Yeah.
Canada gets it too. It's the Salinas Valley and Yuma, Arizona. And that's where, and the fields are on the other side of the water supply. So, you could basically throw a rock from, the lettuce field and hit one of the cows.
Yeah.
It's just mismanagement.
Yeah.
And it's really sad that we're still in the same spot.
So, would you see like the easy solution for, these contaminated greens basically being, you can grow greens here or you can have cattle here, pick one, kind of like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's nothing that's simple.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all kinds of land use issues. There's water rights issues. These are really complex. They go back hundreds of years, and
Yeah.
fighting, between farmers and ranchers and all
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. And,
Half the
but,
cowboy movies are about that. Yeah.
right. But I mean, these are things where this is where, in my view, good science and government intervention has to come into play.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this is where, we have to like go, okay, what's the goal here? Is the goal to try to not have people die from eating lettuce? That
Yeah.
seemed like an admirable goal to me,
Yeah.
and encouraging people to eat, more fruits and vegetables should be an admirable goal,
Yeah.
for our public health. And so then it's a matter of trying to go, okay, how do we do this with the least disruption to other people's livelihoods who like raise cows
Yeah.
and grow this and have I mean, when people were making the West green by diverting water from the Colorado and other rivers, we didn't even know
Yeah.
that bacteria caused human illness.
Mhm.
We didn't know that.
Yeah.
And so, we have a infrastructure that's built before we understood germ theory. We
Yeah.
have, land use that hasn't kept up with how pathogens are spread. So to me, that's one of those kind of situations where government, industry, consumers, farmers, you gotta all got to get in a room and go,
Yeah.
look, we don't want dead and poisoned little kids, and we don't want pregnant women to lose their babies. We don't want the elderly, you know, who fought in World War II and the Korean War and, to die from eating a cantaloupe or
Yeah.
a salad. I mean, so I think you have to kind of figure out those things. And I guess I look at it is, we have a hard time doing a lot of things, humans
Yeah.
politically, but, I look back at what happened with hamburger and I just think to myself, you know, if the beef industry and the USDA and consumers could essentially fix that problem,
Yeah.
some other problems are not quite so difficult to fix.
Yeah, seems to be like if you were a human being, you want to be able to eat your food and not die from it. It just seems like a
Yeah, a
everyone's
commonsensical
interested.
thing.
It doesn't matter what political
Yeah,
stripe you're in,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
And I mean, people, it's the old adage, you're whistling past the graveyard,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of people do that, and but and obviously I've seen way too much,
Yeah. Yeah.
of, I've been in ICUs when, families pulled the plug on their kid.
Yeah.
I've seen, a 2-year-old take its last breath. I've seen that. And
Yeah.
I've seen, what happens when, you know, people lose their large intestine or their brain damage from E. coli and
Yeah.
or die from listeria. And, we're in the middle of a large listeria outbreak linked to deli meat,
Yep.
which, we could talk about for hours. And, and so, but I think all of these things can be solvable. And I think it's just a matter of trying to put yourself in someone else's spot
Yeah.
and put yourself in one of my clients' spots. And, and also, but also understand, what the farmer needs and what
Yeah.
the regulator needs and trying to find a solution that solves the problem. And I think sometimes we spend our time just fighting with each other over stuff that just really doesn't matter.
So, uh, for complete exposure of bias, my audience knows that I am definitely left of center. And you locally famously had the Trump chicken. Is it still around? It's
So,
still kicking?
no,
No.
I thought we had, got rid of Trump,
Yeah.
and so I took the chicken to the dump, and
Oh. Yeah.
and so, but yeah, I mean, yeah. So,
So,
but I mean
yeah.
that the food safety really shouldn't be a political issue.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. It should be just a
Yeah,
common
yeah.
sense,
And actually,
bipartisan thing.
the Food Safety Modernization Act, I'll tell you a kind of a interesting story. So the Food Safety Modernization Act was a sort of a compilation of a lot of different ideas and laws that really started generating after the Jack in the Box case,
Yeah.
but just didn't get traction until the early 2000s, 2004, 5,
Yeah.
6. And they really moved forward in the House, and in 2009 it was a complete bipartisan bill. There was as many Republicans as Democrats who voted against it, but
Yeah.
it was overwhelmingly supported by both parties. And then it went to the Senate, and unfortunately the Senate had just passed Obamacare, just barely.
Yeah.
And they had no interest in doing anything
Mm.
bipartisan.
Yeah.
And so the Food Safety Modernization Act, the biggest overhaul in food safety in 75 years,
Yeah.
just was stuck in the Senate. It just wouldn't go. And we were lobbying that. We were there. I was there. I mean, I was back and forth to DC a couple times a month
Yeah.
during 2009, flying clients in, going to Congress members, senators' offices, trying to find a solution. And it just wasn't going anywhere. And then the Republicans won in 2009, and they were going to take over the Senate in 2010. And it was
Yeah.
clear that this bill was going to not go anywhere. And so we made a real all-out push in late after between Thanksgiving and Christmas to get this bill to move. And you were fighting with, and not fighting with, but you're fighting for space with, other admirable bills that were trying to be passed. The Dream
Yeah.
Act, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, lots of other bills. You'd see the same people in the elevators going to see the same senators.
Yeah.
But right at the very end, I had a client, Linda Rivera from Nevada, who had eaten some cookie dough in 2009 with E. coli in it, and it nearly killed her.
Yeah.
And Harry Reid, senator from Nevada, who was the majority leader at the time, talked to the Riveras on the phone, and he came up with a way of pushing that bill through the Senate, and it got signed by Obama in January of 2010.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you look at those kinds of things and you kind of ask yourself, if you just kind of keep at it,
Yeah.
that you can make changes. And the Riveras were wonderful people to put themselves out like that.
Yeah.
And to Harry Reid's credit, he was able to deliver something that in the long run I think is going to save lives.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what that's kind of what our government should be trying to be about.
Yeah. I am a salmonella survivor. I've talked to this about before, but I probably would have died if I had not gone to the hospital when I did. I probably quite literally would have shit myself to death. Like, it was bad. I went to school in Hawaii, and we'd play in the rivers and stuff. We'd always had warnings like, watch out for leptospirosis, because cattle runoff from that can bring it in. And if you've been playing in the fresh water and you have flu-like symptoms, go to the hospital, because it might be the flu or it might be leptospirosis. And if it's leptospirosis, your organs liquefy and you're dead in 5 days. And so I had flu-like symptoms. I was like, oh crap, I do not want this to be lepto, because I was terrified of it. Went to the hospital, and they gave me some sort of antibiotic for lepto in case it was that, and then tested me, and it was kind of a hilarious, traumatizing ordeal, because I go to the emergency room, and the emergency room is like bulletproof glass, a bunch of people, and I go up, and I am going to the bathroom every 4 or 5 minutes. It is not pretty. And I put my name on the list and tell the lady, hey, if I'm not here when you call my name, I'm in the bathroom, so please just wait a second. And I go in the bathroom, I come out, and there's like a whole new group of people in the waiting room. And I go up to the window, and it's like, I called your name, you didn't show up. I'm like, oh my God, I was in the bathroom. Please, like, I'm going to the bathroom every 5 minutes. If you call my name, I'm in the bathroom. And this went on for like hours before finally I happened to be in the waiting room when she called my name. And I get in there, they put me on fluids, and one of the first things they did was we need a sample. I'm like, hey, no problem. I am a fountain right now. I can give you samples like
Yes.
that. So they give me this piece of Tupperware. The nurse sends me into the restroom. I get a sample, but I don't have a lid. And so I got this sloshy, gross, awful
Oh my
sample.
gosh.
And then the nurse is gone. She's like not there for me to put the lid on. And I'm like wandering around the ER trying to find someone to take my disgusting Tupperware of poo from me. And finally, some poor guy gets it, and they go off and test it, whatever. So I get my antibiotics, also so many IVs because I was just so dehydrated. And about a day or two later, uh, uh, it's this finals week of my first year at school in Hawaii, so I've missed finals. I've been in the hospital. I've been sick, and I'm driving to school to drop off a whole bunch of lab reports for my physics lab because I hadn't been there to turn them in. And my friend is bicycling towards me. This is before I've had a cell phone, and she's like, "You need to go to the hospital now. They gave you the wrong medication." I'm like, how do you know? Because my mother had called her because I didn't have a phone, and told her to like go get me. So I go and find out I have salmonella and not leptospirosis. They had to give me a whole nother antibiotic regimen. And but I in 4.5 days between when I first got ill and when I got my second set of antibiotics, I lost 45 pounds. So
Wow.
basically 10 pounds a day for how long? I looked like I was a famine survivor. It was awful.
Wow.
But
Wow.
so yeah, I know exactly what this can do to someone, especially if oh, they're just a little ill. If you wait a few
Yeah.
days, you can be absolutely screwed. I'm
Yeah.
just glad I thought it was leptospirosis because if I didn't know about leptospirosis, I never would have gone, and you might not be talking to me today. Uh,
Right.
but I was poisoned by Pizza Hut, and there's
Oh,
their buffalo chicken pizza. I was an employee at Pizza Hut, and we had this buffalo chicken pizza special, and I was like, the sauce had no odor. It was really weird. It's just like it was like smelling water, just no odor to whatsoever. So I made myself a pizza just to see if it had flavor, and that's what poisoned me and poisoned like 50 other people in Hawaii. Uh, and their solution, I should have retained you as a lawyer. I just never occurred to me at the time. But their solution was cook the pizza 1.5 times through the oven, and that was
right.
it. Like the chicken is toxic. What are you gonna do? That's kind of
Right.
their
That's,
their mo.
yeah, I've been working, one of the things I've been working on over the last decade is, getting salmonella out of chicken.
Yeah,
And, we have, you know, it is like E. coli was in the 1990s. It's completely legal to knowingly sell contaminated chicken,
yeah,
salmonella contaminated chicken. And we've been making a little bit of progress. Some of the standards have gotten better, but we've got a long way to go. And hopefully I live long enough to see the battle won, but
yeah.
it may go on for a long time.
In
So
in the movie, you kind of highlight the industry lobbyists versus the public health lobbyists and how that is always butting heads.
yeah.
And have you been able to get across any of those industry guys about the success with E. coli? Like, it just how great it is
You know,
to
yeah, I mean, so the answer is it seems kind of obvious,
yeah,
but there is a lot of resistance to change.
yeah,
And, there's just sort of a gut reaction, um, you know, visceral change in any change that the government is suggesting is bad.
yeah,
And science, has not is not as popular as it maybe once was
yeah,
10 or 15 years ago. And so, there's a lot of work to do. But I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, listening
yeah,
and being able to tell stories about, real people and making people who, are in positions of decision making uncomfortable,
yeah,
with their lack of action. And, that's like one of the things I'm working on right now with the listeria outbreak linked to boar's head meat. It's up to 59 people sick, 10
mm,
dead,
yeah,
18 states, all for the most part on the East Coast, although there's a couple of people sick in New Mexico and Arizona. and so the outbreak could get bigger.
Yeah.
But I don't think so. But the plant was inspected by USDA inspectors, but the inspection showed, pretty bad, inspections
Yeah.
all the time for years.
Yeah.
And you kind of ask yourself, it's like, well, what was the company thinking?
Yeah.
And, like, what were the government inspectors thinking? And so I've been pushing really hard with Congress and Senate to do hearings
Yeah.
to make people come and explain, like, what the hell were they doing?
Yeah.
And so, I'm hopeful that, a tragedy like this, will bring some clarity as to
Yeah.
how it happened and why. So the old goal being it shouldn't happen again.
Yeah. So 2 years ago, when we had the baby formula problems, where
Mhm.
where
Yep.
basically the company behind the baby formula did, I can't remember the number, but it was like $5 billion in stock buybacks and zero
Yep.
maintenance on their
Right.
facilities, and they were half of all the baby formula that we produce in the United States, and they ended up just straight up murdering babies basically as a result. And there always seems to be this sort of short-sightedness on the corporate side of, oh, it's too expensive, let's just rush it through and sell it, with zero concept for the consequences that it can be for your corporation in the end, like Boeing, right?
Right.
Boeing,
Right.
they've foregoed safety and standards, and now they're reaping the repercussions of this
Oh yeah. Yeah.
years
No,
of toxic corporate action, right?
One of the things in the food space, I've obviously kind of thought about this way too much,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the things is I think they forget what they're making.
Yeah.
And, it's almost like they're making nuts and bolts as
Yeah.
opposed to, hams and, salads.
Yeah.
And they sort of lose track of, like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
And, like in the Boar's Head thing, it was a family run business for, generations and generations. And then later generations sort of turned it over to professional managers, so to
Yep.
speak. And, they took their eye off the ball.
Yeah. I remember reading a book about the Bush administration. I think Jim Hightower wrote it years ago. And there's a whole section about how meat lobbyists got into the Bush administration and had not necessarily laws changed, but sort of enforcement changed. And one of the things they highlighted was, there were fewer inspectors from USDA and FDA. And a big problem was the USDA ones. And that if the USDA inspectors came upon a factory and they went, oh, this is bad, and they were forced to shut down, that USDA inspector was going to be financially liable for the shutdown if nothing was found wrong. Right.
Right.
So they refused to shut things down. And we had some like listeria outbreaks. I remember a big one in like Pennsylvania around that time. So like,
yeah, no, it's, the thing about all this is there's humans that are doing this, and, people don't, so many people just don't want to be told what to do. Their reaction is, don't tell me what to do. And, it reminds me a lot of, myself as a 2-year-old. And so, but, again, a lot of times, government and regulators do a very poor job of scientifically educating people about why it is that they should do this particular thing. And, it's not perfect. Scientists make mistakes, and government bureaucrats, are human and they do stupid things. But, if industry and government and consumers are working together in the common goal of producing safe food so it doesn't sicken or kill your kid, that should be the kind of the reason. And, from that, legislation and regulation and standards should be set. So, you don't, and it's not just about, this is probably a bad way to say it, but it's not just about not killing people. it's also about the economic cost. I'll give you an example. In like the Boar's Head, they're going to shut down this plant, this
Yep.
Jarrett, Virginia plant, 500 workers. Jarrett's a small town,
Yeah.
probably a couple thousand people. So they're taking away the livelihood. Yeah, they're saying, oh, we're going to move some of these workers to other Boar's Head plants. But what's going to happen to this town?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's not just, although I think
Yeah.
that just is enough.
Yeah.
I think it's not just the sick and the dead that are impacted.
Yeah.
It's like everybody.
Yeah.
And so I just think that, if you look at the inspection reports that I got and from this plant, anybody who reads them would go, what in the hell were they thinking?
Yeah.
What were they thinking?
Yeah.
And what were the regulators thinking? And I think we really I'll get to the bottom of much of this in my
Yeah.
litigation against them, but this is really something that, you know, should be televised Senate hearing and like, what the hell were you thinking?
Yeah. It's very,
Yeah.
sounds very similar to the peanut case you had.
And in many
Yeah.
respects, it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was, and I think that they did a great job in the documentary, just laying out just how bad that was.
Yeah.
But no, fortunately, we don't see that quite as much. We don't see people knowingly selling contaminated meat or contaminated food.
Yeah.
But when you see inspection reports like we're in the Boar's Head plant, it was maybe not intentional,
Yeah.
but it was awful damn close.
So with the inspection reports from USDA officials or from inside regulators from USDA. So why didn't the USDA
Yes.
shut them down ahead of time?
To
Yeah.
be learned.
Okay.
To be learned.
Yeah.
And it's, one of the things that interesting, and I actually, it's good that I'm still learning new things at my age, but the USDA subcontracted out to Virginia state ag officials the inspection of the plant.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize, frankly, that was something that was actually done.
Yeah.
And, but apparently it's not super common, but
Yep.
there are some states that, they do that. And Virginia being one of them. And, I don't know if the inspectors were not trained well enough or
Yeah.
whatever, but, the inspection reports reported things that were really bad.
Yeah.
In fact, there was one notation that said the plant is an imminent threat. And that was a year and a half before the outbreak.
Yeah.
And so you're like, it's because that's one of the questions. I mean, if I was Senator X,
Yeah.
I would have a hearing and I'd bring, Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack in front of me and going, explain to me how that couple of words
Yeah.
in an inspection report didn't land on your desk.
Yeah. It seemed like alarm should be going off everywhere. And yeah.
What happened?
Scrambling the
And,
fighter jets.
There's an explanation. It's like, I don't know, our computer system didn't work. It doesn't talk to each other.
Yeah.
Somebody went on vacation and lost I don't know, whatever the dog ate my inspection report.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know there's got to be some excuse or there's not an excuse.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things.
Yeah. It is mind blowing. And in the grand scheme of regulation, like I spent a large portion of my weekend arguing with a guy who doesn't think we should have any regulations for anything at all. We should just live as free people, right? And I keep trying to point out that these regulations exist because, if we don't have them, people die, or the economy crashes, or an entire industry fails miserably. And I keep trying to use examples and leaving the food safety realm. We can think about Enron, right? Enron got huge because we deregulated the electrical grid in California, which allowed them to do all sorts of crazy self-dealing and boost up. The regulations existed to keep companies like that from destroying themselves, but they've lobbied hard to get rid of the regulations, and then it essentially became suicide at that point. We have
Mhm.
banking regulations. We do things like the Glass-Steagall Act, and then we remove it, and then we are amazed to find that the banks all fail all of a sudden. But the banks were the ones lobbying to get rid of it because they can't remember that the whole reason it existed was it was to save their lives. And
Yeah.
and we have this monopolistic nature, or I guess it's more of oligopoly at this point with our food supply. We've got only a few grocers. We've got only a
Mhm.
few meat, dairy, and veggie suppliers, and they're so centralized and so powerful. And they seem to forget that if they kill off their customers, there's no one to buy their food, right? If the marketing is so bad for Boar's Head, who's ever going to buy Boar's Head again?
Yeah, I don't know if I don't I have I have suspicions that Boar's Head's going to have a hard time
Yeah,
coming back from this, especially as we learn more, and as part of the too is the problem, the uh, media is not the same as it was, 25 years ago, 30
yeah,
years ago in Jack in the Box. The media world and the ability to dig deep and, do uncover things,
yeah,
has really sort of gone away. And, for me, I have an interest in figuring out what happened and why, because I want my clients to be compensated. So there's an
yeah,
economic driver for me to do the research and the digging
yeah.
that finds out answers. And so, but yeah, we don't have the kind of press coverage that we used to have in situations like this. And um,
Which seems to be another one
yeah,
of those problems of concentrating everything, you know.
yeah, well,
Yeah,
concentrating everything and and not having an economic model that
yeah,
actually works.
yeah.
So
So, my personal favorite bureaucrat of the last like several decades is Lena Khan of the FTC. I think she's done a remarkable job, sort of sticking it to the man. And they
mhm.
really hate her. And she hates monopoly. She hates when corporations get too big, and she's going after them to try to split them apart. Do you think that we need to sort of atomize the food industry in some respect?
Well, so the short answer is um, yes. The longer answer is, you want to have enough economic power that they can, spend the money on food safety.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. I got contacted by several women whose kids got sick from drinking raw milk in Salmon, Idaho.
Mhm.
And so I reached out to the farmer who sold the milk at the local Safeway. And, the farmer has no insurance
Yeah.
and, basically runs a raw milk dairy in a because and doesn't have any of the systems that would even make it reasonable
Yeah.
that his raw milk would be safe.
Yeah.
So that's the other side of the equation is that what's that right size
Yeah.
that you have
Goldilocks
enough
zone.
yeah, you have enough economic viability that you can actually make stuff safe. But
Yeah.
then the other thing too is the more complex our food systems have gotten, the longer the chain of distribution
Yeah.
is, the more concentrated it is, the more likely is that, a mistake will blow up into a big problem.
Yeah.
And so, it's my example of this spinach in the 25-acre field. And had it been, cut individually versus mass, produced,
Yeah.
you would never have had that outbreak if it
Yeah.
had been, smaller population. So, there's all that kind of stuff. People always go to me as like, is it safer to eat at a farmer's market? And the answer is probably yes. Probably yes, it is, but not, absolutely.
Yeah.
You still need to know something about the farmer. And sometimes these small farmers are the same people who don't believe in science,
Yeah.
who
Raw
think that
milk in
because they're
general.
yeah, who think they're small, that the rules of nature don't apply to them. And,
Yeah.
it's trying to find that right balance is difficult. And, especially humans that don't, don't pay attention to foodborne illness outbreaks.
Yeah.
They think everything's going to be fine, and oh, that happens to somebody else, not to me.
Yeah. When it
So
happens to you, it sucks. Uh, so,
yeah, I
so,
no, no, I appreciate that.
um, so I'll try and tie things current event wise. We know that there's been a very active effort by the Kremlin for misinformation across the board. We see it in politics. We see it in vaccines. I personally think that there's been a large movement in social media towards stuff like raw meat and
Mhm,
raw milk, largely
mhm.
out of the same group. That's because
Oh,
it's
interesting.
basically asymmetric warfare, right? Like if you can
Mhm.
convince your enemy to basically kill themselves by not getting vaccinated against preventable diseases and eating pathogens all the time, you're doing like half the labor that you need to do before,
Right,
and it's really interesting to see the crowds that are rallying behind things like the raw milk movement. And
right,
you know the numbers are silly, like you know out of the 1% of people get sick from milk, and like 90% of that is raw milk, right?
right,
And raw milk is like a fraction of the market. It's like
right,
2% of the entire
right,
market. So basically
right,
just all everyone's getting sick is getting sick from raw milk.
right,
um
right.
and
But I mean,
yeah,
I have a raw milk case going on in California right now, and and the raw milk farmer, even though 165 people are genetically linked to each other
yeah,
by salmonella that was found in them,
yeah,
and that it was also found in the guy's milk and on his farm. Um, he said that the whole thing is an FDA conspiracy
yeah.
with the milk industry to put, him out of business.
Yep.
And the crazy thing is his sales have gone up.
Yeah.
And you're like, so I mean, I just think that yeah, it's like I said, we're interesting people, humans are. So,
Well, we're getting close to the end here, so I'd like to read some. If people have got questions here in the chat that maybe you can answer for folks.
oh, sure.
I mean, I think half of them are probably being like, I stepped in here and there's no show going on. Um, okay, GDC is praising you, saying she watched the documentary and has really liked your work. Lost on Island just watched Poison last night. If you eat food, you should watch it. You definitely should. It's a good, concise documentary. It's not going to go too far out to explain things, you know, at a high scientific level or high legal level. Just kind of makes you aware of the power forces that are involved with food safety. Um, that's about polls. You don't need to know about that. Oh, well, the FDA and EPA only get worse. I assume this is probably from the Chevron overturn of the Chevron decision.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, that's a great question. So I am very concerned about that. And it's just, at least it's really a question. The Chevron ruling was that, and what the Supreme Court overturned was that regulators should get some level of deference in the decisions that they're making regarding the regulation. And so with the way the Supreme Court has ruled and say that they should not get that sort of level of respect, it may well make it much more difficult for regulators to make decisions, and it'll make it easier for, especially lobbyists and
yeah,
organizations that to thwart, otherwise, you know, decent regulation.
yeah.
I'll give you an example. There's a new salmonella regulation with respect to chicken, that there's a breaded raw chicken product that sometimes looks like it's cooked,
Mm,
and people are supposed to cook it in their ovens, but many people cook it in their microwaves, and the raw chicken doesn't necessarily always get cooked,
yeah,
but it looks like it's cooked because sometimes it even has grill marks on the exterior. I don't know how they just get on there, but it's a magic marker.
Yeah.
But the USDA says that thou shalt not have salmonella in that product,
Yeah.
which makes a lot of sense. And I could see the industry saying, the USDA is overstepping its bounds and we shouldn't defer to their scientific analysis. Hey, by the way, look at our scientific analysis. It says
Yeah.
whatever we want it to say.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Smokey's healthy for you. Yeah.
I'm a little concerned about the Chevron decision on top of many of the other Supreme Court decisions that they've made.
If our viewers aren't too familiar with Chevron, basically the courts have determined and from powers granted from Congress that you have these regulators, you have these agencies that oversee, the financial markets, food, child safety, worker safety, things like that, environmental. And if Congress passes, a Clean Water Act, then they charge the EPA with how do you make the water clean, because the Congress are experts, but the scientists of the EPA are. So the EPA writes regulations that fit within that make the water clean thing. And overturning Chevron essentially means that if you're going to have any regulation whatsoever, it has to be a specific law from Congress. Otherwise, it can get challenged in court that way. And it's going to be really cumbersome in the long run, right?
No, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how regulators do it. It's a kind of going to be potentially a Wild West.
Oof. Okay. You don't really deal with things like additives in drinks, right? Or food. You do mostly pathogens.
Pathogens. I was involved in the Daily Harvest outbreak that had a illegal ingredient from Peru that was introduced as an ingredient. So,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's so many different areas of food law that people could get into. There's the whole, safety of our food supply in the sense of sugars, salts, and fats that, and the obesity epidemic and all of that, and
finding tons of lead in Lunchables.
That kind of stuff. And so there's any lawyer, any future lawyer out there in the audience, please go to law school and pick up the cudgel on a lot of different things involving food.
Okay. Yeah. So someone's asking about like 0-calorie drinks and the additives, and are they safe? And I don't know if that's your area of expertise.
It's not an area that I know, but those are definitely things that people need to pay attention to.
Yeah. Okay, so here we go. There's everyone. We finally went live, so everyone's all like jumping in there. Low B says Durbin, DeLauro, and Blumenthal are co-sponsoring a bill to establish the Federal Food Administration. Do you think this will better protect consumers, and would it have enough bipartisan support? This has to do with the fact that they focus so much on drugs, right, and not enough on food.
Yeah. So for most of the audience, they don't know this, but FSIS, which is part of USDA, deals with red meat, chicken, and pork, and also catfish. FDA does everything else, including all fish, except for catfish.
Yeah.
And it's a at FSIS at USDA is part of an organization that's sole purpose is to promote agriculture. So it's a weird place to have, a food safety agency.
Yeah.
Over at FDA, the food agency part of it, the food part of the FDA is what I call silent. And because understandably, FDA is very concerned about drugs and medical devices. Yeah. Because it's a real concern. So what Rosa and Dick and the Dicks, Durbin and Blumenthal have been talking about, and it's been something that, we've talked about for the last 25 years, is to take those two agencies into one and, in a sense, call it food safety and human nutrition.
Okay.
Because both of those things really, really require, laser focus to make us safer.
Yeah. Okay. All right. There we go. Luis Gonzalez wants more talk about Typhoid Mary. She is the catalyst for food safety probably, and for studying people who have immunities to diseases but can still be carriers. Lots
Yeah.
to read about her. And she also did not believe in washing her hands. Peter Brand, I'm happy my food, wherever it comes from, doesn't make me sick. Food handling is probably the most important part of staying healthy. Definitely, even if you aren't working in a restaurant, take a food handler's class just once in your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
It's really simple. It's like a half an hour. You can do it online usually, but it's like you go, oh yeah, I probably should like handle the faucet handles differently than I've been doing, things like that. So I think that might be. Oh, his thoughts on recent bird flu affecting chickens. Oh, yeah, bird flu in the milk supply and things. That's big
Yeah,
fears,
no,
right?
that's a big issue, and especially people who are thinking about raw milk.
Yeah,
You might want to really rethink that because of bird flu. They have found fragments of bird flu in pasteurized milk,
yeah,
which the fragments aren't going to make you sick.
yeah.
So yeah, that's another reason to really double think about whether or not you want to drink raw milk.
Yeah, there's a couple of strains of bird flu that have really high mortality rates. We're talking like 30%
Right.
mortality rates, and that's for humans. So yeah, if it becomes much more easily transmissible, that could be a big news story. It was kind of popping up this summer about the various dairies where it was showing up in cows and workers and stuff. Um,
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
yeah. All right, Bill.
So,
I want to thank you for your time. I don't want to. Yeah, I know you got
oh,
a
thank
6:30
you.
appointment.
Yeah,
Um,
I gotta go do a thing about salmonella in LA by Zoom. So,
okay. All right.
hey, really good to see you. Thanks for
Let's see you
having me
too.
on, and
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing you here in town.
Yeah, maybe we'll do an update someday for everybody.
All right,
Okay,
I'd
thank
love
you.
to.
Have a great
Yeah,
day.
take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Okay, let me all right. Hey everybody. That was our show. How was that? Was that fun? Sorry about the late start. I for some reason, so I'm using regular OBS to stream this because it wasn't letting me use Streamlabs for multiple accounts, which is really annoying. And so for some reason when I hit start stream, it popped up on my side, but it's making me do another button to start streaming YouTube, which was very annoying. But anyway, here we are. Hello, hi. I want to thank everybody for jumping in there. And sorry we lost like 21 minutes of the show because, oops. But we'll get now that I know, I will fix that in the future. I think what I'm going to do is you'll find me back on the regular channel. I'm going to do a Thursday show on Houston We Have a Problem where we talk about the market stuff. I don't have it in me to do another show tonight. So, plus my mother's asking me to come over for dinner. So, food's food, right? So I want to thank everybody. I'm glad those that made it thought it was insightful and good. And please share it because I need to get the viewership up on this channel so that I can monetize it. Right? Wouldn't that be great? So thank you. Yeah, Bill he's a rad dude. His family's great. He seems to be in law for the right reasons, which is affecting change. Like he's basically keeps lobbying the government to put him out of business. Like he wants the food to be safe so that he doesn't have to keep suing all these companies anymore and he's out of work. So I think his goal is he'll finally retire when they finally get enough of these food laws in there. And I forgot to talk about raw sushi. Oh yeah, we didn't talk about like raw sushi and things like that. That's why you have the spicy bits, the kill lot stuff on there, right? Your wasabi and salts and whatnot. But yeah, so anyway, thank you everybody. I did see a thing that said that the intro was muted. I wonder how I can fix that. If I have properties, I do speed. Okay, I got that. I have MPEG options. Use hardware, loop. I don't see anything about sound on that guy. If I scroll there, if I click that. Well, anyway, I'll see you folks tomorrow, and we'll do a Thursday show on Get Your Rocks Off. Ready? 1, 2, 3, bam.